If you think it's warm in here, it was about 1,000,000,000 degrees warmer when I first got in here this evening. I opened up all the windows, and so it could have been worse. Need to remember, this is the time of year to start opening up the windows all day long on Sunday. I am very pleased to invite you to open up your Bibles with me to the book of Job. Job, chapter 1. Job, chapter 1. If you crack open your Bible right in the middle, you'll find, hopefully, the book of Psalms. It's very close to the middle, the biggest book in the Bible. And it's right before the book of Psalms, book of Job. This is in what we often refer to as the poetry section of the Old Testament. When you get into the book of Job, you will notice there is a very poetic structure to most of the book. Starts off by telling a story and then goes into a lot of poetic rhetoric going back and forth between Job and his 3, and then one additional toward the end, unfaithful friends that weren't very good to him. Let's start by reading a handful of verses to get the story side of it. We'll just begin in verse 1. Job chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, "There was a man in the land of Uz, whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil." And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels and 500 yoke of oxen and 500 female donkeys and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the east. And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so, when the days of feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." Thus did Job continually. So, we have the perfect beginning of a story, an introduction to the man and a description of the man described quite elaborately. He's described as quite a good character. And he basically had everything a man could want in this life, especially during this age. This was very early in the history of the world, truly, very early. One of the ways you can tell about the time this book was written is just based on the fact that he made sacrifices for his family, which was not something that was done during the Mosaic period of time, because that was reserved only for the Levitical priesthood. So you know that it was done during what was what we call the patriarchal period, when fathers were leaders of their families and they would make sacrifices for their families. And that's what he does. In fact, I really like what it does here, because verse 5 shows I don't know what you'd call him. The first word that came to my mind was an overprotective father. He thinks to himself, man, it's possible one of my sons was not doing the right thing, so he's doing what he can to make sure that there is atonement for his sons. And so he's a good father. And so far, as the story is told to us, things are going pretty good in his life. Until something happens, something that is way beyond our ability to comprehend what really takes place. It's a very mysterious occurrence that takes place in a realm that we can't understand, and we're going to read that next. Verse 6. It says, "Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them." Now, just stop right there for a moment. When it refers to the sons of God, much of the time in the Old Testament, in this type of context, it's referring to angels. The angels were often referred to as the sons of God in this kind of context. So keep that in mind. And there was an actual day for which that they were presenting themselves to God. And that's about all we know. We don't know, how often this occurs. It's like, is this annual? Is it weekly? I don't know how often this takes place. But somehow Satan, who we all know is sinister, evil, the father of lies, a despicable one. I don't know if he was like wearing angels' clothes or something. We don't know how he got there. We know that God knew he was there and let him in. But it's like, John and I were talking about this one time on one of our conversations. It's like he had some like hall pass to get into heaven for a little while or something. It's just one of those mysterious things that we really don't have any answer to. But that's what he did. And he is the one who we find God having a dialogue with. Verse 7, let's read. "And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou, or where did you come from? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Have you considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that fears God and eschews or shuns evil. Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Does Job fear God for nothing? Have not you made a hedge about him and about his house and about all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth your hand now, and touch all that he has, and he will curse you to your face. And the Lord said unto Satan, Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only upon himself put not forth your hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. So, we find out a very threatening circumstance. And of course, I speak from a human perspective. In fact, it doesn't matter how many times I read this, I still come back with the same thoughts and the same feeling about what I just read. You know what it really reminds me of is your favorite movie. We all have our favorite movie, and you've seen it over and over again, and you know what's going to happen. And every good movie has the moment of dissonance, right? It has like the climactic moment when everything is going wrong, and then there has to be some type of solution to the problem. And the main character in every good show is not fully aware of what's going on and is getting ready to sometimes make a major mistake that's going to come back and bite him later, and all these kind of things. Every good movie or good story has this kind of thing. And the problem here is Job's situation. He didn't do anything, but it was something that happened in heaven that he simply was just not aware of. And so whenever I watch this, as if like a production before my very own eyes, as I am reading it taking place as if it's happening in real time, I think to myself, no, like God, don't say that. Satan's actually going to do it. And then, of course, when we read the beginning, it's like, yeah, I wouldn't mind being Job. And then just a few sentences later, it's like, I would hate to be Job. And what ends up happening, of course, and this is the next section, next half of the chapter, but I'm just going to summarize it for you. He loses everything. He loses everything. And this reaction that he has, his response to losing everything, is where the famous saying comes from, verse 21. It said that Job speaks, "Naked came I forth from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." And it says in verse 22, "In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly," which is why Job is Job. Which is why we still have a book about him, why we still read about him, because what a remarkable character he was. So the thing I want to do with you this evening is do a theme study through the book of Job with you and give you opportunity to open up your eyes in a way perhaps that you never have when it comes to this book of Job. The book of Job, it's not really easy to read, in all honesty. Most of us read the first few chapters, we get the picture, we read a couple of dialogue, and we start to think, whoo, man, okay, I think I get the point, And I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that, except for the fact that there's so much riches and so much depth within these pages. And it takes a lot of perseverance to actually read through this and to take a look at the things that Job pours out of his mouth, from his heart, from his soul, as he is mourning the loss of all his children, because all his children were taken away from him. And that is about the worst thing a human can go through. I think if you were to probably take a look and do some research, find some study where people talk about the worst things that have taken place in their lives, it's almost across the board something that happens to offspring. Most especially someone who is close to you. These are horrible things that he had to go through. And that would have been enough, but he also loses all his material possessions. He loses his status as the greatest man in the East. We just read that he was described as the greatest man in the East. And then in chapter 2, we find out that Satan was given permission by God to also touch his health, and then even his health was afflicted. And then as a result of that, even his wife says to him, seriously, you're still hanging on to this God thing? Curse God and die. Just be done with it. And then that would have been enough. But then throughout the remainder of the book, he's got 3 buddies who show up, and the whole time they're chewing him out. Just chewing him out. And throughout the whole thing, now he goes through a lot of interesting thoughts, a lot of painful reminiscence. He does a lot of doubting. He doesn't stay so strong as to not doubt. I don't think any human can. Don't forget, even the Christ, before he was to be betrayed and hung on the cross, he begged of the Father 3 times, with sweat, as it were, drops of blood. He begged the Father, please don't make me do this. So even Jesus had that kind of moment. So of course, Job was going to have moments of asking why and what in the world, and God has truly turned his back on me. That is his true feeling in this moment. So here's the theme that I'm going to present to you today that I hope enhances not only your understanding but also your appreciation of our dear friend Job. Because truly at the end of the day, at the end of the lesson, what it's going to conclude, the conclusion is going to end up being, Job literally goes through all this for you and me. That's why he goes through this. So that you and I could have an eternal piece of literature to always go back to and say, somebody had it worse and still maintained his integrity. So, chapter 1, verse 1, let's take a look at the theme that I wish to present to you today. It's going to be found in the description of Job. So, chapter 1, verse 1, it says, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job. And that man was perfect and upright, one that feared God and eschewed evil. So our theme is going to be found in that word. If you are using the King James, you will find the word eschewed. If you're using another version, you may find something like shuns or rejects or avoids evil or something along those lines. But basically somebody who puts his hand in the face of evil and does whatever he can to keep it separate from him. And of course, evil here would be anything having to do with a free will sinfulness. Anything that goes against what God says, anything that goes against what God wants us to do. And there's quite a list of do's and don'ts in the scriptures from the very foundation. Of course, like the Ten Commandments, have no other gods before me, to thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not bear false witness, thou shalt not covet. I mean, these are commands that are all for the purpose of helping us and glorifying God. That really is what it is all about. And those are the type of things, those types of sins are the types of sins that bring misery upon humanity. They really, truly are. You could trace all pain, all agony back to those types of sinfulness. If it wasn't for those types of things, even though the world that we live in now, because it does have sin, but if you were to find a lot of repentance, you would find a lot more joy in the world, even if you couldn't get rid of all pain and agony. Those sins bring forth so much pain and agony, but the greatest of them all is being separated from God and not being able to have the access to God that we should have because we keep saying yes to the rotten stuff. And we people are stubborn and foolish. That's just the problem. We got pride, we have lust, never satisfied, never as thankful as we ought to be. And so one of the strategies to overcome that is to reject evil. Now, this is a very active word, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. And it's an interesting word, and there's actually a theme of this word that takes place throughout the book of Job. What I'm going to share with you now is the Hebrew word. And it's not actually an easy word to decipher, like most of the Hebrew language or the Greek language. When you ever try to do these word studies of the original languages that the Bible was written in, it's not easy. But you can get a lot of insight when you take these words and single them out and then try to see the theme or the pattern for which they are used. The word is sewer. So I tell you what, every now and then you hear somebody say, man, you learn something every day. Well, today you just learned a Hebrew word, sewer. Sewer, which means to remove away, to separate from, to shun. There's lots of different variations. But the main thing that I want you to notice right here is one of the things that made Job is the fact that if something was evil, he tried to get far away from it as quickly as possible, is pretty much what is happening here. It was his commitment. It's something that Job had to do, and nobody could do it for him, not even God in heaven. That's one of the things about God that's truly indeed mysterious. There's verses like in 2 Peter chapter 3 that says, God is not slack concerning his promise. It can be easy for us from time to time to wonder, man, so what's the deal, God? I mean, the world is becoming more and more evil. It seems to be prolonging. You seem to be prolonging this whole return of Jesus thing. And I kind of wouldn't mind if you just returned right now. I think that might be okay. I got a few things. I still want to take my Jeep four-wheeling, but I guess I could pass that up for heaven. I guess I could do that, So, the fact is, God is not slack concerning his promise, but he is long-suffering. And that means he is patient. He's waiting. He's waiting for maybe just one more soul. Because God knows, he knows the inner man. He knows the heart. He knows what's going on within you. And he might just be waiting for that. I'm waiting for, I tell you what, it's like Jesus is at his right hand looking at him. He's saying, now? And the Father's like, no, I'm still waiting for this one person. And who knows, maybe that person is in this room right now. I don't know. But God is waiting for us to make the choice to reject evil. Now, we'll show you the next time this word is used. It's over in the 9th chapter, Job chapter 9. And pretty much every time we find this word in this study, we will find it being used by Job himself. I kind of avoid quoting his buddies unless I have some particular reason for quoting them, because I question pretty much everything they said. It's really interesting because when you read the book of Job and you read the way his buddies were talking to him, they were pretty deep too. They were pretty amazing thinkers also. They had a lot of really profound thoughts to bring to the table. But the problem is they did not have this quality that Job had of rejecting evil, fearing God the way they ought to have. They had a much more limited understanding of who God is. Job, for some reason, had this very keen understanding of who God is. And that's what you really want to do, and that's what the whole point of this is. Because what we're going to find is a plea from Job, and then we're going to find a section or a couple of verses where this word is used and God's role, and that is also going to be applicable to this moment right here. Job chapter 9 and verse 34. We're just going to focus in on this one verse. Watch what it says. This is Job, and he says, In verse 34, let him take his rod away from me, and let not his fear terrify me. So this is interesting because the take away in verse 34, let him take his rod away. So take away is the same word, sewer. Sewer. So Job isn't able to shun the rod in this circumstance. He can shun evil because evil is his choice. And I want you to really be aware of that right now. The difference between your power to shun and your lack of power to shun. You can shun evil, but when God makes a choice to bring the rod to your back, when God makes a decision to drag you through the coals, when God makes the decision to take your life that you thought was going this way and to go and take you to start going this way by all kinds of things, all kinds of ways. With Job, how did he do it? Well, you don't want to know. I guess we just talked about it. How did he do it with Job? He took his kids away, allowed them to be butchered. Job makes this emotional, heart-wrenching plea to have that removed from him. But when God makes a choice, know this, that God knows what God is doing, and his thoughts are higher than your thoughts, and his ways are higher than your ways. And though you cannot understand, you must accept. And acceptance is something that humans are not good at. We do not know how to accept the way things are. Reminds me of, I did not plan this, by the way. We have a serenity in the room. But the serenity prayer. God grant me the courage to accept the things I cannot change. The courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. God grant me the serenity, that's it, to accept the things I cannot change. And Job, he makes that plea, but God needed potentially Job to learn something. You know, Job would have been even all the more wise after this. But one of the things that I want you to really understand is Job went through this for you, so you could learn, so we could learn. There's a statement that Job makes. This is over in chapter 13. Take a look at chapter 13 real quick. Job 13 and 15. This is probably one of my favorite verses out of the book of Job. This is like the ultimate acceptance. Job 13:15, Job says, though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. But I will maintain mine own ways before him. Now that's exactly what we're talking about right there. That type of acceptance, that type of wisdom, that type of commitment. Because remember now, Job made up his mind to reject evil no matter what. No matter what comes, no matter even if God the Father takes me in a direction that is so painful, I don't even think I can stand it. And that's exactly what Job has to go through. So that's God's role. That's part of God's role. And I'm going to show you another place in which this word is used. And this one is much more on a grand scale. Chapter 12. Job chapter 12. Notice with me. Job chapter 12. The whole chapter is rich. And it's amazing because what Job is doing is he is searching deep within, and he's looking up toward the heavens. He is doing an evaluation of everything he has seen, everything he has looked at, everything he has beheld with his own eyes, everything he has wondered about. That's what we find throughout the book of Job. And as he is exploring this, the Spirit of God is obviously richly within him because he is starting to utter truths that would be too wonderful for his mind to even be able to piece together. And one of the statements we find is in chapter 12 and verse 20, because he's speaking about even the created world. A moment ago, he talked about the beasts of the field and the fowls of the air and the fish in the sea, and he's like making all these wise statements about the creation of God. And then chapter 12 and verse 20, watch this. Job says, he removes away, that's the same word. He removes away, he's sur. God, sur, the speech of the trusty is what it says. Trusty is like, the counselor, the wise person. God can and will confound the wise. He can and he will confuse those who think they are wise. If that was what he needed to do, he would have it done. I know of instances where this took place in the scriptures. The book of Genesis, we find the Tower of Babel. Their intent was to build a tower that reached the heavens. It says, man, we got this thing figured out. We got a way to cheat the system. If we just keep building up, we'll be able to whatever. It's a really interesting situation. And you know what God does? Just changes the languages, just removes speech and just, puts it into this puzzle and just separates it and he just does his thing. I've been in situations personally where I'm preaching a sermon and there's a thought or an idea or something that I had, and I worked on it hard. I'm telling you, I had it all written out, man. Like it was like poetry before I got up to preach it, and I got up to start saying it, and for some reason I couldn't say it. And I started fumbling all over my words, and I'm like, what's going on here? And I have to, at the end of the day, think, God must have not wanted me to say that for some reason. I don't know for sure, but it's possible God was like, no, not today. Or maybe it was, you think you know what you're talking about, but you don't know what you're talking about. I pray that everything that I say is in accordance with God's will every time I stand before you. And sometimes God just don't let me say some stuff. I thought it was great. And he says, He'll do it to you too. Verse 24, it happens again. He takes away the heart of the chief of the people of the earth and causes them to wander in a wilderness where there is no way. He takes away. That's, again, sur. Oh, I didn't tell you how to spell it. I told you I was going to teach you a little bit of Hebrew today. If you were to spell it in English in a transliteration, it would be S-O-O-R, sur. A lot of you are thinking like sewer, like, what's under the ground, pipes with filth in it, That's one way to remember it anyway. But no, sur. He takes away the heart of the chief of the people of the earth. So, we studied this in our Wednesday night Bible study because we're in the book of Romans, and we came across Romans chapter 13 where it says to respect the higher powers of the land. And that's not easy to do, especially if a guy who you do not like happened to win the office. That's not easy for us Americans to accept. But have no fear. If God wants to, he'll take the heart of that person right on out of there and have them wander around in the wilderness. He did it to Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel. He'll do it to whoever he pleases. Take a look at the verse right before it, verse 23. Watch what it says. It says, he increases the nations and destroys them. He enlarges the nations and straightens them again. God is indeed powerful. Don't forget that, ever. So when we take a look at a lot of these things, there's so many mysterious things that take place in the affairs of humanity. And we often wonder about these things. We think about these things. We are so bold to have the audacity to even worry about things. And don't be out playing games like you don't, because we do. We worry about stuff all the time. And it's truly for the student of the word, somebody who is able to take a look at these kind of types of things. Like, real wisdom is when you reach a point where you say, God's God. God's got it. The battle belongs to the Lord. God will reign supreme. God is the Lord of all creation. And whatever is happening, may it be his will. And I can only do the one thing that I have control of, and that is my power to reject evil, which is the one thing that we found that was applicable to Job so far in the study of this word. He was able to do one thing with it, and that was to make up his own mind and his own heart to say no to the evil. The rest of it, hang on tight, buckle up, and watch God do some crazy stuff. Because it's happening, and it's not going to stop. And if you want to watch and see how crazy it's going to get, you can read some of that stuff in the New Testament about how crazy things get. There's going to be a lot of stuff happening. And only the people who have this secret, the only secret is, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. And that is where we find our strength. Let's keep going. Got a couple more. Chapter 19, verse 9. 19 and verse 9. Job still aching, still wondering, still even doubting. Chapter 19, verse 9, it says, he has stripped me of my glory and taken the crown from my head. Taken from is the same word, sewer. So what's really interesting about this is when it comes to our role, our capacity to use this word, it is to shun. And it's really interesting when we find God's power and God doing it, God is like shunning our capacity to have something. It's like you can't have everything that you want. You know what I mean? It's like, remember Adam and Eve when they were living in this beautiful setting in the garden and everything was provided to them, life was grand, and then it was taken away from them. No matter how much they wanted it back, it was sewer taken away from them. No matter what they tried, they could not get it back. You can't change the past, but you can have it washed by the blood of the Lamb. And that's a pretty interesting reality to have to accept. All the stuff, all the pain, all the things I wish I could have done differently, you can't do that. You can't have it. It has been removed from you. Like God removed the crown from off of Job's head. His 7 sons and his 3 daughters couldn't bring him back. Could not have them back. So we find this metaphor of a crown being removed from his head, and Job uses that word in this setting. Chapter 27, verse 2, it takes place again. Chapter 27, verse 2. As God lives, who has taken away my judgment. And of course, the use of the word judgment here, the word justice would be fitting, because Job didn't feel like justice was his. You know, when you really stop and think about it, he wouldn't have felt like, man, this is a just cause. He would have felt very taken advantage of, and he would have felt very belittled in this circumstance, and he didn't do anything to have this all taken away from him. And so he actually makes a statement that God removed from him his justice. And then later, the end of the verse, and the Almighty who has vexed my soul. And all the words in between, all the statements in between, make it clear that this book really is not an easy read. It's filled, just loaded with this kind of stuff. And there's a lot more themes in this. This is just one theme, one word that we're going through. And you see what is happening, how Job feels through it all. Now, I want to take you to one more verse for our lesson this evening. Job 28 and verse 28. Job is getting ready to finish up. He only has a couple chapters left, much like this, what we've already taken a look at. But in chapter 28 and verse 28, we have a wise saying, and I think it's pretty neat. I do believe this was the last time the word was used. And I don't believe by accident, because that's, again, one of the poetic qualities of this book is it uses these certain themes, and there's a purpose for it, and it makes sense as it unfolds. And we saw it unfold from a certain way. The very first verse of the whole book is about Job's power, Job's ability to reject evil. And then the rest of the time, the word is used with God's capacity to make decisions for your life that you just got to deal with, you just have to accept. And then the last time the word is used is right here. So let's read it together. Job chapter 28 and verse 28. Watch what it says. And unto man he said, behold, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom. And to depart from evil is understanding. The word depart from is our word. So at the end of the theme of Sur, the conclusion is this. No matter what God does, no matter what the rest of humanity does, no matter what decisions anybody else makes, at the end of the day, at the end of the lesson, Job says, to depart from evil, that is understanding. It is your choice what you're going to do when it comes to your relationship with the evil that is in the world, which inevitably also means your relationship with God. Now, God allowed him to go through all this, even indeed put him through all this, allowed Satan to drag him through all this. And God had purpose throughout the whole lesson, throughout the whole experience for Job. And the neat thing is, the truth is, nothing in this life matters anyway. What does matter is eternity. What does matter is what we do here echoes in the next life. So our decision must be an undying commitment to reject all the glittery and shiny object and all the distractions and all the things that try to get us to think about other things, take us away from God, and go straight into a relationship with him, much the way Job did. And what it did was it enhanced his understanding of who God is. And that, again, is a big part of what this lesson is, understanding who God is, his ultimate power, and the fact that God would do all this. He may even have you go through stuff just to teach somebody else a lesson. If you're a disciple of Christ, people are watching. You are who you claim you say to be. Make sure that when people see you, they see the love of Christ. Make sure that when people look at you, just like when we look at Job, they see somebody who is of incredible commitment and strength to righteousness and God and his will. Every day, no matter what. In just a moment, we're going to sing about a man who wasted his life away. The word prodigal means wasteful. And the prodigal son returned to his father, and the father welcomed him back. And there may be somebody here, like I said a moment ago, God might be waiting just for that one person. Maybe that one person is indeed in this room who has not given his or her life to God in this type of commitment. And if that has not yet been done, then it would be a shame to let the sun set on this day before you make this decision. As the prodigal son is called to return, may you come and return to the Father today while we stand and sing.